And so a New Haven native and an SOM class of 1989 alum, Gina Boswell is the Chief Executive Officer of Bath & Body Works. Her distinguished career spans 3 decades, leading multi-million-dollar businesses in beauty, home, and personal care, both in the United States and abroad, including Avon, North America, Ford Motor Company, I want to ask you about that, and the Estee Lauder companies. Gina has served on the boards of several major companies, including Wolverine Worldwide and Applebee's, among others. She's a former president of the Yale University Council, a past recipient of the Yale Medal, and most recently, in 2023, she was appointed to the Yale Board of Trustees. Join me in welcoming Gina to speak with us today. Really, really wonderful to meet you. Why don't we start at the beginning?
Okay.
And your beginnings are right here.
Right here.
You're from New Haven.
Yes.
They didn't know I meant that. Yeah. And I gather that you have some rather famous New Haven relatives. Did I read that right somewhere?
My first cousins, possibly.
So tell us about that. Tell us about growing up in New Haven, about this town and you.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to come back home, as it were. I grew up in Worcester Square, if you're familiar, yeah. And it was just a wonderful experience. I was, this second generation Italian American. Many of the Italian Americans really all formed around Worcester Square. And there were some fairly famous pizza places on Worcester Street, which we'll get to in a second. But I think, New Haven is an amazing place. So we're on Whitney Avenue here, right? And then over here, there's a street called Audubon Street. I was 6 years old and I took piano lessons at the neighborhood music school, which, I could still feel, having my little scales book and my pencil, and I feel that when I come here. But I also feel just an enormous pride for what was a sprawling set of 25 first cousins, all within a couple mile radius that we can call in, at any time. We didn't have babysitters in my family. We just had cousins or aunts and uncles and things. And so one of my aunts and uncles, my father, so my maiden name is Roselli, and my father, his brother, married Betty Pepe, who was the daughter of Frank Pepe's. So it's my extended family, not me personally, but it was a family affair from the standpoint of both brothers. I have 3 brothers, the only girl. Both brothers of my older brothers worked at the pizza place, so somebody was making the pizza, the other one, if you're familiar with the peel, there's a rather large peel that puts the pizzas in the oven and so forth. And my mother, even though she was a telephone operator, and by the way, worked right on George Street, which was anybody's been here a long while, that whole huge building, which I think may be part of the Yale community right now, was the Southern New England Telephone Company, and that my mom was an operator there. But if she had available time, she would waitress at Pepe's. So
that's great.
That's what it is.
That's a great story. So that's the beginning.
Yeah.
So you grew up doing your music lessons, riding your bike around the street probably, playing baseball with your brothers, doing the whole shtick. You leave here, you go to high school in New Haven.
Yeah.
You go to school in Boston.
Yep.
And then eventually return to get your MBA here. Right. MPPM.
MPPM initially, yeah.
Here. So tell us about that path.
Yeah.
The path to Boston, what brought you back, et cetera.
Yeah, so a little bit about the shape of what was to come, which of course I would never have predicted, but we grew up here, my dad was an accountant, and I remember even how he thought about things. He evaluated things like as an accountant. So things were an expense, and but my mom...
Dean's like that, sir.
To her credit, my mom would say, if it was tuition or anything like that, she said that's not an expense, that's an investment. And so she knew kind of how to, speak to where I was going to, spend investments and so forth. And so we were always prioritizing. I don't know in the 70s, I'm going to date myself now, but I don't know in the 70s what would have been considered low income, but we were definitely not above that. We had a bunch of starving musicians, and we had, people who were in the restaurant industry, and then both my mom and dad were really hardworking, and we'd always prioritize things. And I remember, and this will get to how I ended up in Boston, but I remember one year, first of all, my older brother came home from kindergarten, and he played the Star Spangled Banner by ear. And so my parents said, well, this child is, a prodigy, and we're going to have to spend money. And so bought, for Christmas, bought a big grand piano. And so my other brother and I got, one brother got a used transistor radio. So my oldest got the piano. Just want to be clear that this is the priorities that were happening. I got a used Mary Poppins doll. Okay, so, it was funny at the time because my other brothers thought, oh, wow, Dante's going to have to go take piano lessons, but I got this really cool transistor radio, so he was actually excited by the fact that he didn't get the piano. But I was always prioritizing, they were prioritizing, and so we had, one of my brothers was in college at the time. As I was thinking about where to go to school, I received a scholarship to Boston University. I wasn't going to stay in New Haven in any event. It was my time to sort of leave it. And so my father, being the accountant, said, that's where you're going. And so that's how I ended up there. But I absolutely loved Boston University. I did major in accounting, following my dad's footsteps. And then after 3 years of working in public accounting, I decided that I wanted to broaden beyond finance/accounting. And I thought, what better school to come to, even though I had an undergraduate in business?
Yes.
I wanted to come to a differentiated program that would, that I thought Yale spoke to. It was only maybe 12 years since the founding class, right? And so it was this very interdisciplinary, really training leaders for nonprofit, public, and private, sectors. And I thought that was actually quite prescient. It was ahead of its time. At that time, there was not enough programs that were thinking about, well, if you work for government, you're going to work for government. If you're going to work for nonprofit, you're going to work for nonprofit. And we didn't even yet realize that there was going to have to be cross-sector collaborative partnerships that were going to be important because no one sector can do things alone. And I thought that was quite forward-looking. So that's why I came here.
I see. I want to ask you some more details about your SOM experience, but I'm going to pivot quickly, just briefly, to your work in business.
Okay.
And so as I look at your career, I was online Googling you a bit, and you spent the bulk of your career in the beauty industry.
Yes.
Estee Lauder, Avon,
right,
and others. Then I see Ford in there.
Yeah.
Ford. Tell me about the Ford piece.
Yeah. So what probably is not in Google is that the love of my life, who I've been married to for 32 years, is in the steel business. I tell my adult daughters, who are now 29 and 25, that you need to ask the question, is my passion industry geographically compatible with your industry and your passion? Steel and beauty actually aren't in the same locations. I don't know if you know that. So how I ended up in Detroit was because my husband, who was the president of a steel company, had an opportunity to go there. So I found myself in Detroit, and I thought at that time there was, it's pretty automotive, if not automotive focused, then sort of the second tier, mostly automotive, maybe a few banks. And so I decided to work for Ford Motor Company. And it was an interesting role because they actually wanted to be more of a consumer company. And I was coming from a consumer background.
I'm sorry, where'd you been just prior to Ford?
Estee Lauder.
Estee Lauder, got it.
So Estee Lauder was, I was, you're familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy. I was self-actualizing when I was at Estee Lauder. I just want you to know, I was at the top. I was loving everything about it. And then my husband said, it's my turn. And I said, it is your turn. And actually, I moved to Detroit and commuted for 2 years back to New York. So
interesting.
It was, but there were 2 children that came along the way, and so that got a little bit challenging. And so I decided that maybe I should live and work in the same state. So that's what happened.
I can see.
That's how I found myself at Ford.
Got it. So you were the CEO of Bath and Body Works. You took over that company when there was a major change for the brand. What were you thinking as you did that? Well, like, what appealed to you about that? And I'm curious about the special challenges and opportunities that the change or the brand change presented to you.
Yeah. So I think some of you might be familiar with Bath and Body Works. I am in full brand garb here with my gingham outfit.
You recognize it, right?
Yeah. So what did I know about Bath and Body Works before I even got a phone call? I knew that it was an iconic brand. I knew that it was a global fragrance leader. And the more I talked with the board, obviously, it was spinning off, by the way. It was spinning off from a larger company called L Brands, which had a sister company, Victoria's Secret, and a number of other things. So the company was being spun to be an independent public company. And so here was this opportunity to join a Fortune 500 public company, but with the sole focus of what is personal care, fragrance, home fragrance, et cetera. And so there was a lot to like about that. But then the more I understood, I got even more excited because while I had 3 decades in mainly beauty personal care, I had done every channel. So I had done the prestige distribution channel from Estee Lauder, to your point, the Avon, was the direct selling. There was e-commerce as well. There wasn't a channel that sold beauty that I was not part of. And yet Bath and Body Works was this vertically integrated end-to-end channel, right? So it's the stores and the .com all the way through what is called Beauty Park, which is this network of suppliers in Columbus, all within 3-mile radius, that made the product. So it is the intersection of retail and CPG.
Got it.
And I thought, wow, that offers a lot of flexibility. So you have this iconic brand. People love the brand, and we can talk a little bit more about that, but you're a very loyal following, and yet you had this end-to-end and all the agility that offers. I really wanted to be a part of that. If anybody's been to stores, how many people have been to a Bath and Body Works store? Okay, you may know that it is possibly the most infectious, enthusiastic associates around. And you walk in there, and even today, if I'm in home office, and I tell my home office, folks this too, if I am having a bad day, I only need to go into our stores to get a nice, sort of can-do, optimistic view, and then not to mention what the power of fragrance does. Did you know that scent is the most evocative of all the senses?
I did not know that.
Did you know that fragrance is like, smelling gets right to the neural pathways and can bring you back to change your mood, to express your identity, to connect with one another. So I love the product as well.
Very cool. So you take over this what would become a Fortune 500 company, and you're leading this company. You're a woman. And if I may ask this question, I'm curious what it's been like for you, early days and now, leading a company, leading a prominent, well-respected and widely used brand, apparently, as a woman. Any special challenges?
I wouldn't say so at Bath & Body Works. I think certainly the customer, we've just launched a great, 2-3 years ago, men's line, which is still nascent. It's, a smaller percentage of our business. But, I'm a customer first, right?
Yes.
So as a woman, and I, if you come into my home, you will see, candles, 3-wick candles. You'll see some, wonderful body wash. So I really, really do live and breathe the brand first as a customer. And the predominant customer profile that we have are women, even women who are buying men's products for either their partner, their son, their father, et cetera. So I do think that being what I'm trying to, of course, bring to the company even more so than they have already is this customer centricity. So I feel like that's sort of a leg up in terms of being a customer first.
Yeah. We had at one of these talks recently, about earlier this year, Vivek Murthy was here. We're talking about a crisis that he is observing around the country. It's a crisis of loneliness. And he meant loneliness in various myriad forms, that we are not as engaged with our cousins as once we were. That's one kind of loneliness. People don't call their mom and dad as much as they should. But he also meant loneliness in our professional lives. And he was curious. He asked me whether, as a dean of the school, I experienced a particular kind of loneliness. I was not expecting the question. And I do. There are things that I can't share with anyone.
Right.
I can't share with the faculty. I can't tell the students. I can't tell my staff. Do you deal with the similar loneliness problem?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Because these leaders will be leading some version of Bath and Body Works soon. Talk to us all about this loneliness challenge.
Yeah, let's talk about why the loneliness happens. The loneliness happens because, well, first of all, if you're a public company, other than your board of directors, you really can't share your problems. And if you grew up and if you professionally grew through, this approach of a problem shared is a problem halved, right? That's what I always thought. You share a problem and then maybe, none of us are as smart as all of us. Right. We can solve it together. When you get to be the CEO, not as easy. So you can't share, but you can have a team. And I have a fabulous team, but they don't individually see all that I see. And so this loneliness cuts to the core of, I can take all these opinions, I can maybe share pieces of the problem, but the holistic, decision-making, if you will, feels very lonely.
Yes.
So it is.
That resonates very powerfully with me. You've talked in other forums about the importance of risk-taking. How do you take risks as a CEO? And how, if at all, is it different from risks you might take elsewhere in life?
So for me, and I've been consistent on this, but the biggest risk that you can take is not taking risks at all, because obviously there's so much change going on that unless you identify opportunities, all of which have some degree of risk, you're not progressing. Like no progress can happen inside of a comfort zone at all. I forget the gentleman who had that quote. And so, as a CEO, the risks that you take can be a number of things. But, again, leading a team, I'm always trying to make sure that they're empowered to take risks, because if my team doesn't take risks, progress also doesn't happen. And so the question is, how do we mitigate risks rather than not take those risks? And how do we make sure that if we take a risk, that there is, a way to fast fail, something that, there's big risks and there's small risks. There's, by the way, quite calculated risks. So I'm always making sure that we have enough information from which to, take an informed risk. And then if we don't, I always think there are certain risks that are sort of in the vault. I do think about things in two-way street versus one-way street. So if we're going to take a risk, I like it to be a two-way street so that if we go there, we can come back if we need to.
I see what you mean.
But there are certain things that are one-way streets where you take that risk and you have now been into a whole different strategy, a whole different business model. And those are quite different in terms of the amount of information that you need to have and frankly, the amount of involvement you might want to have with your board as well.
So I've talked about identity in your leadership role, what it's been like to be a woman. I've talked about this important challenge of risk-taking. Loneliness, the phenomenon of loneliness and how it sits at the top of the organization. I have one last question about work-life balance, I think it's called. I struggle with this. Yeah? They will struggle with it. They might be struggling with it now, for all I know. Give us some words of wisdom about that.
It's a very personal thing. So in other words, I could give words of wisdom. You could share yours. I'd love to understand your tips. But the fact of the matter is, it's what works for you is not going to work for me, is not going to work for you. So let's start with the basics on that. From my point of view, I'm an integrator. I have never believed in the myth of work life in terms of its separateness. So I know that there are going to be days that my work is going to win, and I know there are days that my family, especially when my children were younger, that was going to win. And therefore, I needed to build bridges. I just needed to integrate as much as possible, oscillate, if you will, and I wanted the full life. I did not want to, in fact, compromise on either one or the other. I would say one big word of wisdom is to choose your partner wisely. It is the number one thing that you can do is to choose your partner, because if you had a shared set of values about how you're going to lead through this crazy but wonderful juggling of life and work, you've got a leg up. Versus if somebody has a different point of view about when you're on and when you're off. So I have been blessed to have a partner that aligns, and he knows I'm on. I'm on almost all the time. So gotta be honest. But I don't think he would have it any other way either. And where I really see the proof point is my daughters. Because there were moments when things were so fragile, and somebody would say, well, who raised these wonderful children? And I'm like, well, had we known, we didn't know whether the kids would be all right. And in fact, the kids were all right. I hope that the way my daughter describes me later on in life is that she wouldn't have had it any other way in terms of the mom that she wanted either. Because that's the other guilt that you feel, So
that's terrific.
Integrate.
I want to make sure I leave time for questions from the audience. I want to pivot to speaking a bit about SOM. We brushed past it.
Yeah.
You said you wanted a differentiated place, a place that was distinctive in the world in some way. What was it about the place that drew you specifically? Was it the mission? Was it your sense of whom your classmates would be? What was it about SOM when you joined that especially caught your eye?
So again, I didn't want to have a conventional, at the time, MBA, because I was only 3 years out of getting my BA, my undergrad in business. In fact, at the time at SOM, I was almost the youngest person in the class. The average age was, I want to say, 28 or older. I was 23 when I entered. And I also, so I liked the fact that there was a lot of experience in my classmates. I always thought that there was this great mix of practice and theory. And part of that comes from your classmates, right? You can learn a lot, but unless you crystallize it with your experiences, it's not as meaningful. And so I had a great class. What is so great about my class? It was experience, it was diversity. I mean, we had a very diverse class in almost every way. We had, whether it was age, race, gender, international. And to me, that's living in the real world. I wanted a real world example, and there were some just unbelievable classes. IGB was one, individual and group behavior, which people that were in that era, all of us took it. That was our shared experience. I would come at it from a financial point of view because that was my experience.
So, is this the class where you guys were in like a smaller group?
Yes,
something?
we were. We had dyads.
Okay, I've heard about this. Yeah.
So it was probably the most vulnerable sharing that you had. And mine, you know one of my classmates, Adam. I mean,
Yes.
this is why we are tight to this day, 35 years later, is because we had that experience. But it was about how did people think, how, we were really soaking it up because we wanted to know as leaders, we knew that our success would not be attributed to us, but rather how we would develop our teams. I mean, if you get to those levels. And that was a very, very good class to share that. So why I say diversity, it was a diversity of thought also. So I was in that particular thing, and there was a case that said there was some, obviously a fictitious case that there was some toxicity or something in a plant. And I was doing the math on, well, how many days would we have to shut the plant down in order to, still make the numbers or whatever. And then my IGB classmate said, what are you talking about? What's a life worth? Shut it down. And this person had a union background, and I was like, wow, this is broadening my perspective. So it was fabulous.
So, as you say, I know Adam, and I know others of your classmates. I know her class very well. I've met you guys on Zoom one time, actually.
Yes,
remember?
Yes.
It's a really cool class. Most of the classes are cool, but yours is, yours is way up there. So, one thing the dean has to do is every year I have to admit a class. I have to oversee a staff that admits a class. And people are applying from all over the world, their resume. What should I be looking for on the students whom I attract? It's a two-part question. And is there anything you would urge me as Dean to make sure we never lose with respect to the curriculum or the culture of the school, your school?
Yeah, it's a great question. What should you be looking for? I mean, I think while the words weren't used exactly as they were talking about interdisciplinary. I actually think that SOM does that better than anybody I've seen, but also Yale does that better than any, maybe a bit biased, but any university I've seen, because of the flexibility of the curriculum, that you can actually connect the dots. So what does that mean in terms of the class that you want to attract? I believe you want people who can create that mosaic of experiences, and that will just take every opportunity to take not just what SOM has to offer, but every element of Yale University. Because not only did I benefit from a fantastic class, but I've benefited from fantastic faculty. And it wasn't just a person that was a professor. It might have been the person that wrote the book or created the arbitrage pricing theory at the time that was up for all these prizes. Like, you don't get that opportunity in many universities. So if you think about an applicant, and you look at, and I don't know what, it could be something that maybe there's maybe an algorithm for this now, but someone who would take advantage of every piece that this great university has to offer and is not so narrow, although there might be a benefit for a specialist to branch. There were people that wanted to pivot when they came to Yale as well. But I think if you could know that up front, I think that would make the class enrichment even more so. And then the second part of your question was
about the curricular offerings at the school and its culture.
Yeah. So I think if there are ways to get the best of both worlds, if there are ways to, and I think Yale does as well, have access to a broad set, but then some preservation around the intimacy, whether in the class size or in the other ways you can construct it, I think that's really important, because whether or not I thought it at the time, I did feel that this experience that I had over the 2 years at SOM was going to serve me a lifetime of relationships.
I see.
And of perspective that I wanted to be able to tap into. And if I had a very dispersed group of people that I maybe knew this much and not this much, maybe I wouldn't have been able to benefit from them over the course of the following decades.
Got it. I want to offer a reassuring note to you that with respect to the student piece, I think I can confidently say, and I'm not saying it because they're here, we continue to draw an extraordinarily talented set of students to the school, distinguished by different experiences from all over the world and seeking to do very many things, all of them animated by, as were you, this business and society aspiration. It means different things to different people. But I talked to a few students for whom it's not a top of mind thing. Which makes me come to this last question. So business and society, as you understood it then, drew you here, and it drew them here now. You lead this organization. Where is the business and society made manifest in your company's operation? Is it in governance? Is it in your hiring aspirations? Is it your environmental concern? Is it where? If I look at this company, I say, you know what? That's run by an SOM. Because they go business and society right there. You see?
Yeah.
What would I be pointing to?
Well, I hope you'll be pointing to many things, because there's many touch points. So first, I think in general, business and society is talking about enlightened leadership. And I do think that was maybe not a term we used back then, but that's kind of what it was.
Yes.
How do you educate the next generation of leadership in a way that transcended maybe what used to be called charismatic leadership into enlightened leadership, which is we're here for a short period of time, and then we're here to make the world a better place, and all of those. Where I am today, that manifests in many ways. So on the one hand, we're a public company. We have a fiduciary responsibility. There are shareholders. There are stakeholders.
Yes.
We have, on any given day, 55,000 associates, employees that we have. But at peak, that can go as high as 85,000. So it is it is not lost on me that whatever risk or decision that I make together with my team, I am actually responsible for 85,000. You know, that's a big thing. So I always have to think about that. And then everything from the operations, I mentioned to you, it's end to end. So when we're talking about partnerships with our suppliers, all the way from who's working on those, who's working in Madagascar on the vanilla that we use in our fragrance, all the way through. This is society to me, is the intersection, like how do we do all of this for good without any of the potential pitfalls that we might have when we're dealing with humanity in every possible way. And so there's not a place that I see that doesn't have a societal impact.
Got it. So I'm going to turn to them in a second. You just became a Yale Corporation trustee. Yeah? Something we hear about, but the students might not know exactly what a trustee is or does. Can you tell us that really quickly before I move to their questions for you?
Oh, sure. So, well, I was very honored and humbled to be asked
We're
to be...
incredibly proud of her. It's a very big deal.
Thank you.
It's a very big deal. Please tell
Yeah,
us.
so, so one of, I think, 15, 16 trustees called the trustees, but also maybe in other ways called the Yale Corporation.
Yes.
And we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that this great university continues to inspire the minds that inspire the world, right? So there's a very big, everything from the buildings to the, you know, the deans, the schools, the curriculum, the student life. It is a far-reaching role that we play. So I take it very seriously, as do my fellow trustees. And I am so honored because for me, being a New Havener and a Yale, you know, the connection between those two, also very important. And then this connection that I had 1987 to 1989, for me, this keeps the connection going on and on and on. So I am a deeply curious learner, life learner. And so if I am at a trustee meeting, for example, where we are hearing for the first time somebody has just invented cognitive, whatever it is, I am a geek all over again. You know, I'm just drinking it all up. So I both take the job seriously and my fiduciary responsibilities about leading this great university, but also very mindful that it's bringing so much back more to me. And to my day job, to my family, and to all of the sort of affiliations that I have. So I'm really, really excited. It's been a little less than a year, but we've got, you know, obviously very exciting work to continue, and it just continues the fabulous legacy that this university is. So
thank you so much.
Good fun.
I could go on forever, but I want to make sure I leave space for these guys to ask some questions.
Yes.
So why don't I open it up for you? And I'll call. So I'll call in the order I spot your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. You got that? Good.
Hi, Gina. Thank you so much for being here. I also for undergrad, so go Terriers.
Go Terriers.
But you talked a lot about taking risks, and I'm just wondering, how do you continue to inspire your team to take risk, especially when risks don't work out?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Risks, by the way, can be career risks. You know, I mean, I would say that back to that Ford example, that was a big risk, right? I knew nothing about cars. And so for me personally, that was a risk. But as I said, if I'm not taking a risk and I'm not pushing myself, I'm probably not growing personally and professionally. I think your question may be more around some of the business risks that people take, and how do we really build a culture that allows for, you know, failure effectively when the risk doesn't turn out. And that is really important, because if you've ever been a part of an organization that is fear-based, it is not innovative, it is not progressive, it is probably in these changing times not going to survive very long. So I'm very mindful of the fact that I have to make sure my team feels comfortable and empowered to take calculated risks in a way that if they don't work out, which can happen for a number of both controlled and uncontrolled reasons, that I'm there to support them and that I am accountable for that. Ways that we do that is we celebrate some of those failures. We're not going to celebrate the largest failures because, and I actually don't know, I think this is, I have to think of who said this quote, but there's, failure is a comma, not a period, and maybe this is Mandela. You could help me with this one. You either win or you learn. I think that's what it is. We'll double check on who that is. I believe it's Mandela. And so this is important. If you're going to really call yourselves a learning culture, then you have to design all these tests to be able to say, and then quickly learn and shift and pivot. So we try to do that on my team. And, it's always work in process, right? Nobody likes to fail, at all. But I only say, failing twice on the same thing, that's probably not a good idea. But failing once is a part of the learning process. So you just can't ever give up. We just keep going. But it is an aspect of culture. You have to have a value inside your company around humility and around experimentation, really.
Who was two?
Gina, thanks so much for being here. I'm really curious to know about your transition to the CEO role, especially with regards to, for example, now being in charge of, signing a 10K and then having to talk in earnings call and be kind of looking at the stock price of Bath and Body Works. So I'm just curious to know what's important for you about all of this and what's mostly just like noise and things that you don't pay attention to.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And by the way, we talked a little bit about my early professional skill. The first part of my four-legged stool functionally was finance. And so when you mentioned 10K, I know it all too well. That's a quote Taylor. So when I remember when Sarbanes-Oxley and other things came out, I remember, and I, of course, was not a CEO anywhere near at the time, and I remember thinking about, the CEO and the CFO's children, and when they're signing their life away on this thing, how do they feel? And now I sort of feel that. So I take it very, very seriously. The 10K, the earnings calls, being, certain that we're doing governance right? Because that's a big responsibility. It's not noise at all. And actually, some of the broader risks that happen these days can actually be, intangible, like brand reputation risks. So, I'm super mindful of what that is. The board of directors also, the stakeholder sort of interactions between them, I also take very seriously. But we're also there for the long term. Do you know what I mean? So I'm trying to, especially coming in relatively fresh and new, it's a 30-year-old company, but in some ways it's a startup because it's independent, relatively new, from an infrastructure and all of those things. So we're busy. We're busy laying on top of a very successful foundation, how to take that to next. And so there's a lot of strategic aspects of it. Inherent in what your question was around compliance, it felt like. But I'm hoping, that we do that really well with sort of the 20%, but then the 80% has to be really managing this business for the long term and growing it, which is where my team and I have been spending most of the time.
Yeah, hi, Gina. Thank you so much for being here. My question was, what do you think has been the biggest challenge in your career that SOM didn't prepare you for?
That SOM did not prepare me for.
Say nothing.
This is a hard one, to be fair, that it did not prepare me for. Well, look, I think that it really has more to do with life. While I will say that we had a very diverse, class, there weren't that many people that were juggling children. I don't think that was in the curriculum necessarily. But, that was something where, it's something that every person has to deal with. But nor did I really expect SOM to prepare me for that. I was relying on those two wonderful parents, the accountant and that telephone operator, that I would somehow take their learnings and apply it to my own children. But honestly, no, because well, maybe the importance of mentorship So whatever SOM could not impart in those 2 years, I picked up along the way from mentors, some of whom were SOM people as well. And then connecting those experiences, like having a personal board of directors, the other classmates who had that experience, so that I didn't have it, but they had it. Is that part of SOM? Yes, it's absolutely part of SOM. It is the progeny of SOM. It is another classmate of SOM. So whatever SOM didn't do in their formal curriculum, I felt I could get through the vast network that it offered me during those times.
By the way, I should have asked you this. Were there any couples from your class?
There are.
So let me tell you guys this. I spend a lot of time on the road,
Yep.
visiting alums all over the world. Every visit, wherever I am, 2 couples will come up. That's been the means. At one time it was 3 or 4. How many in your class?
At least 4. At least 4. Yeah. Yep. It's fun.
I'm a half of a couple.
What's that?
I'm a half of a couple from class of 85.
Are you?
Matchmaking, the matchmaking part
matchmaking.
of SOM.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, that's not something that you.
It's not in the curriculum.
It's not in the curriculum. But what it may be a result of is just how open people are when they come here, that they are open to all the full experiences that could happen. But honestly, whatever we're doing, we're going to see each other. So I'm having my 35th reunion, and probably at least 3 of those 4 couples will be here.
That's awesome. I look forward to meeting them. So 1, 2, 3. Did I miss? Oh, no. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that might be it. Oh,
Hi. Thank you so much for being here, Gina. This isn't about matchmaking, but I think it is probably a question you get often. I think a big part of the End Society mission WS focus on is sustainability, and so I'm curious in terms of like decarbonizing supply chains, figuring out alternative materials, and kind of infusing some of those values into a consumer products company. Number one, what are some of the exciting kind of innovation projects that you or your team is working on? And are you focusing on doing that work internally, or are you more focused on developing third-party partnerships for that?
Okay, all of the above, actually. But I'm going all the way back to the prescient nature of this SOM experience. This was one of the first joint degree programs I had ever seen with the forestry school, for forestry and environmental studies. I don't know what the name is now.
First of its kind in the world, actually.
Right.
Yep.
So talk about forward thinking. I mean, I remember thinking, well, what, in my own narrow world prior to coming here, before my mind was opened completely, that was on my mind. Like, well, what's that about? So to your question, though, I, prior to working at Bath & Body Works, was with Unilever, who had core at its mission, with the leadership of Paul Pullman, quite visionary leader, the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which was a massive, massive thing that was not a separate office by anybody, but rather the way we did business. And so I learned from, I think, a company that was 8 to 10 years ahead of most companies with respect to thinking this way. So come to Bath & Body Works, there are lots of things that we are doing on all those fronts. So from a product perspective, we obviously have personal care. We're using ingredients that often have to be looked at to say, okay, what's the next generation of something that has less of a carbon footprint, and we think about that all the time. So we recently launched, it's about a year now, carton refills. So you can have your foaming hand soap outside of plastic, and you can have it in a carton that is in a beautiful glass decanter. So we're all about making sure that we're offering products that are, really catalysts for change in consumer behavior, because that's the role that we need to play there. But the whole end-to-end is very fertile territory, right? So we can look at scope 1, scope 2, and increasingly scope 3, and put bold goals out there around recycled packaging, those aspects of sustainability, but quite honestly, all the way through to DEI and some, inclusivity and things like that. So we think of it as a quite a broad approach, and leverage partnerships wherever they can be useful, because it is back to that, none of us are as smart as all of us. No one company can actually fix all of these things, but together there's lots that we can do in consortiums, which we do too.
Thanks so much. So last 3 questions. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, and I have
That
to
was
shorten my
yours.
answers. Is that wink that you just gave me, yeah?
I'll try to make it brief. I'm
Yeah.
a huge fragrance geek. I track Bath and Body Works among many other brands very closely. I think you guys were just rated #1 amongst teens in the US. So how did you manage to, if not build in your time, but cultivate this rather rabid fan base that, you know, will promulgate their own social media and increase the influence of the brand all on their own without even influencer marketing?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. It completely predates me, so nothing to do with that. But what we are now doing, though, is to continue that fandom and take it to next. There's so much nostalgia that fragrance is about too, but what I love about, you know, some of the higher purpose things that we do, in addition to the great question asked back there around sanitizers and the importance of clean hands anywhere in the world, frankly. I mean, there are certain parts of this world that without clean hands, there's, you know, disease that is, you know, can literally cut a person's life short, right? So, but to get to back here home, sanitizers in this little pocket bag. So we create this little, not me, but prior. And it felt like even when my kids were young, you had to have that pocket bag. And you didn't just have to have this pocket bag with a nice little clip onto your backpack when you went off to school, which was somehow comforting to your parents because they were like, well, at least they're gonna use the hand sanitizer before they had their lunch. But it was like collectability, and it was like, what fragrance? Is it, you know, pink lemonade, or is it, you know, some fruit punch, or any of the various things, pound cake we have. So I think it's this wonderful combination of a collectability, your friend has it, so I should have it, and suddenly everybody has it, and then parents are thrilled at the same time. So this fandom thing is real. I hadn't known it when I first arrived. I had no idea how much brand love there was. And then if you think about it, and this is something that if you are the, you know, Bath and Body Works aficionado, you'll know this, but we had a celebration of cucumber melon fragrance. Anybody?
He's a real fragrance geek.
Yeah. So 25 years ago, we launched cucumber melon, all right? So it was very popular then, but then we celebrated the 25-year anniversary recently. And so this is longer than I thought, I'm sorry. But what we did was when you come into our store at the 25-year of cucumber melon, we didn't have to do any marketing for that. All we had to do was user-generated content that said, and we put it on a little, you know, stand that said, you took me all the way back to my prom. Like, in other words, the fact that people can smell something and remember what it was like to be at their prom meant that we could then play the playlist in the stores would have been 1990s music. So now you are literally have all your senses going on. Those are the kinds of things that I think perpetuate that fandom, because you're basically a part of my life, and you're continuing to come back with these fragrances. And the single biggest thing you'll see on our Instagram, we have 7 million followers, is when people say, would you please bring back cocoa, whatever it is. And
The lamenting of warm vanilla sugar for however long that was.
yes, but you've now got warm vanilla sugar, so get it in every candle, body wash.
The whole world is such utterly unfamiliar. I'm learning so much.
I'm gonna get you set. Don't worry, I'm gonna get you some
Thanks,
product.
thanks so much. All right.
You want to actually ask my question, so I'll say this.
Okay. So 3 and 4. Yeah.
Thank you for talking to us today. So in your talk, you talked about your move to Detroit and how that was your partner's turn. So you had to make that pivot from beauty into automobile and then back to beauty again. So how do you prioritize your career and your ambitions and balance that with this give and take with your partner?
Yeah, so it is very delicate, but I said I was a kind of a connector. I always looked for the similarities between my experiences rather than the differences. And so in this case, I was going from Estee Lauder to Ford. They were both family, even though they were public companies, they were family members that were literally in the management, okay? And there were other things that were very similar. Super voting power, the class of stock, you don't need to know about that. But my point is, I was always looking for the transferability of things. So did you know that the same translucent, property in a material, a raw material that makes car paint is also, not exactly car paint, but that property is in foundation because it reflects the light. And so when I say that, I went there, I didn't go there, maybe I went there kicking and screaming, but when I got there, I was looking for the comfort of the things that made me successful in my previous job and that would take me to the next. So it would only last like 3-6 months where I would look at my husband, Randy, and say, you took me here. Beyond that, it was me. In fact, what the proof point for that is when somebody said, so when you moved because Ford recruited you to, and I was like, Ford didn't recruit me. I ended up here because of him. And that to me said that I was becoming a car person, which shocked everybody because I couldn't even, change a flat tire before I arrived. But how do I make the most of these transitions? Because I'm going to find myself in places for other reasons, and I just need to make the best of it. So truth be told, every transition was like that. I could have seen myself retiring from Ford had I not, gotten an opportunity to come back east. So
I cannot tell you how wonderful it has been to have this conversation with you. I know our students and the rest of our community feel similarly. And so please join me in thanking you.